just a few seconds of this game and you might be reminded of a well-known franchise, right? No? Well, I will get to that. So, Mato Anomalies is a game developed by Chinese developer AeroWiz and published by Austrian publisher Plyon, formerly known as Koch Media. But the US and EU physical localizations were published by Prime Matter, well, which is a division of Plyon. You play as Private Detective Doe, and he was essentially hired by a woman called Nightshade to investigate something called Handout. During the investigation, he comes across a container that literally sucks him into a different dimension. In that dimension, he gets attacked by a monster, but a man called Graham saves him, and both then go back to the real dimension, aka the real world. Graham's android named Sky-Eye then explains what those creatures are. Those creatures are called Bane-Tide, and they feed on extreme human emotions and find residence in the so-called layers. To enter those layers, Graham uses his prosthetic arm called Mondo Shaman to kill the Bane-Tides. Why are the Bane-Tides dangerous though? Well, for one, they can enter the real world and cause serious chaos if they get strong enough. So now Doe, Graham and Sky-Eye work together to defeat those Bane-Tide and find those handouts Doe was searching for, because seemingly handouts and Bane-Tide are somehow connected. While Doe can't fight inside the layers, Graham takes care of it. And since Graham needs clues to get layer locations, Doe takes care of that in the real world. So that's what I would call a team. Along the way, he will find new teammates that join his cause, and together they try to find what the deal is with those layers, Bane-Tide, Jade Lions, etc, etc, etc. But in the last 5 chapters or so, the story takes a real shift in the sense that suddenly even time travel comes into play. Look, how the story is told is actually quite interesting. You know, you are a detective that gets involved with supernatural stuff and has to team up with others to deal with it. Graham, Butterfly, Smoker and others have to constantly go to a different dimension to deal with Bane-Tide and often save people that were trapped in the layers. Maybe now you understand why Mato Anomalies will remind most people of Persona, Persona 4 or even Persona 5. You may think that's a good thing, but the way this game was developed, it's rather a shame that AeroWiz went this route. Reason is simple. If you played the recent Persona games, then Mato Anomalies will remind you too much of it, as if the developers had little to no or even not enough real original ideas themselves, and thus they had to copy Atlus's success series. Sure, AeroWiz tried to add their own flair and stuff, but in the end you can clearly see that they tried to copy a bit too much instead of just being an homage or inspired by Persona. And yes, there is a big difference between being a copycat and being inspired by. Despite that though, the actual foundation for a good story is there. It had potential to be its own thing from the get-go, and it had a clear direction early on. But the game comes with many clear ups and downs all over the place, with irrelevant quests, some of which are even main quests, but also some really interesting story parts actually. I wouldn't mind those ups and downs all that much, especially since almost every game has it, if the devs tried to be a bit more consistent and didn't try to measure up to Persona in story and style, but because they do, the story is a mixed bag. And towards the last chapters, this is why the story lost me as well. It's too convoluted. On the one hand, you will have that surprise effect, let's call it, because you never really know where the story is going to go, especially towards the end. But at the same time, you will also get the impression that the developers had no clear vision where the story should go or how it should end, and therefore they came up with everything as they went along. That's also why that shift towards the subject of time travel feels somehow disjointed. The story also constantly throws specific words at you that are bare bones explained, and while the game has a journal section to help you out, I am grateful for that, the explanations here are still bare bones. You will get the impression that yes, you've read everything, but you still have little idea what this is all about. But it's not just the story itself and stuff, it's a combination of various elements that lets Mato Anomalies not really shine in a bright light, even though it had potential for it. So obviously there are cutscenes, and this also shows the lack of clear direction. You have 3 types of cutscenes. Mostly you will have these dialogue type scenes where the characters talk to each other, and that's actually quite fine. The voice actors don't talk at all in these parts, but I am fine with it. Sometimes though, it can be a bit hard to tell who is talking unless you read the character's name first, since the characters' mouths barely move, if at all. Especially Graham, that always wears bandages, can be a bit of a pain. Sometimes I've read the text thinking it was Doe speaking, but then I realized it was Graham. A better visual cue would have helped a bit, but well, it's a bit of a nitpick. Still weird though is that only the main characters and a few other important characters have eyes, while the rest, well, it doesn't. Also, the copy and paste will be noticeable for sure. But hey, this is not Atlas but rather a low budget team, so I don't mind. The next type of scenes are these manga style scenes, which are really well done. They have style and flair. Heck, visually the whole game has style and flair, so kudos to the developers. The characters actually even move during these panels, which was a nice touch. But these manga style cutscenes are still a bit weird for a few reasons. For one, the game expects you to press a button to continue to the next panel. In itself that's fine, but sometimes the characters in one panel stop moving and speaking, and you automatically assume that their dialogue is done and you can move to the next panel, and so you automatically press continue. But then there still is another bubble of text that the character wanted to say but didn't because you've already pressed the damn button to move on. Another very weird thing is this. This chick is called Canary, and notice her mouth moving. Now pay close attention to Doe. Did you see that? He talked, but his mouth did not move for some reason. If you pay close attention, then this happens quite a lot, not only with Doe but with almost everybody. Here's another example with Smoker, but this time in a fully animated scene. You see, it's a combination of little things like these that bring this game down. And then there are the fully animated scenes, and these are also quite fine, but they are few and far between. And sometimes they even come across as useless. However, there is a change that often happens between these 3 types of cutscenes, and often it's for no reason or out of nowhere. It would have been better if the developers got rid of the full motion cutscenes and just focused on the manga style ones, because sometimes less is more. The characters are quite interesting actually. In a way, Doe is the everyman, but has the attributes of a typical detective as well. He's the one that talks with everybody and has the most human contact, so he necessarily needs to be somewhat of a typical character. Graham is quite the contrary of Doe. He only has one goal and never deviates from it no matter what. He's the introvert in a sense that tells it like it is and hates wasting time, especially when the Bane tides are on the loose. And when they... I don't want to spoil and tell you what happens to Doe and Graham, but after certain events both characters change quite a bit, and that was a nice touch. And this change I'm talking about between Doe and Graham would have been more believable or even better if the story focused more on the last 5 or so chapters from the very start. Butterfly, yes, they all have nicknames and we never find out what their real names are, well, outside of though, is your kind of sarcastic thief. Smoker is the traumatized ex-soldier. Mist is the, well, Hatsune Miku of the game. You will see why if you play it. Edelweiss is the hardcore boss babe, really annoying because of it, and Ringless is the paperboy. Look, I've described the characters by their obvious characteristics, and while they sound beyond generic, they actually are not. They never overplay the characteristics I've described. They have a solid foundation and motivation, and their side stories gives them extra depth and helps you understand why they act the way they act. This was nicely done actually, especially Smoker, even though some characters could still have had a bit more focus. Still though, Edelweiss was the most annoying and almost unlikable character by far, at least for me. Heck, even Mist gets a full song in the later half of the game for some reason. I mean, it's a nice song that stayed in my head on a loop for about 3 days or so, and despite me setting up the voices to Japanese, the song was sung in Chinese, which I didn't mind at all. But I didn't understand why it needed to happen at that specific time though. Or maybe I triggered it by doing Mist's side story and I didn't even notice? Who knows? By the way, the ending song is also sung in Chinese, and okay, look, when even the damn scrolling text frame drops, then you know the game lacks one thing in particular. Polish. I mean, just look at this. Well, whatever. There are also other characters like Nightshade or even Sky Eye that play an important part in the story, and they are quite fine, but nothing beyond that. And no, I didn't play the extra DLC story part with Sky Eye. But as stated, visually the game looks good. Sure, the characters themselves are kind of cel-shaded in a way, living in a 3D non-cel-shaded world or something, and there is constant pop-in, at least on the Nintendo Switch version you are seeing here, but the game was released for everything else. But I really like the style it has. I mean, just look at it. Sad thing though, there are only a few buildings you can actually enter, while the rest is there for, well, decoration I guess. All vendors are on the street and sell almost the same stuff, so you have also zero reason to revisit most places at all after you've been there once. Actually, many places you will only visit once, or twice at best. And to top it off, this is the whole map, and these small areas are exactly that, small areas. You enter these and the dialogue starts. You cannot walk around in these like in, for example, Neil Bloom Road or South District. It just seems like a waste of space for me to have almost useless areas like these. You are seeing these train tracks on the map as well, but you never ride a train anywhere. You just click on an area and the game loads with this loading screen. It would have been nice if at least during the loading screen you were on a train going to your destination. Again, it's mainly the small things that are hurting this game. But again, I was pleased with the style the game has, and similar goes for the music and background soundtracks. Listen to it yourself.
小細工が一番怖いんだ。これで終わらせる。泰山君と。故事旁若荒诞不经，谁在虚里？
Though here is a weird thing that might only happen on a Nintendo Switch. At least, I assume, I don't know. It usually only happens with Graham, but often when he uses his finisher, there are no sound effects of him doing the finisher. Instead, the background music continues to play on its own. Again, the lack of polish really shows here. Want an example? Okay, here is how it should play out.
は必要ない。
And this is what happens often with Graham.
今がお前らの死に時だ。皆殺しにしてやる。
Never mind the fact that the game crashed on me 4 or 5 times in the 80 hours I've played. Yes, I like to take my time. But let's tackle the battle system and whatever else. So, the actual fighting will only happen inside these layers. You walk around, approach an enemy, and it starts. Mind you that this is turn-based, so if you don't like that, play something else. One weird thing that instantly stands out is that you only have one health bar. Yes, all battle members share one health bar, and if it hits 0, then you lose the game. Basically, reviving members is almost impossible. And while the shared health bar is kind of weird, it didn't bother me too much in the long run. Still, I think each character should have had their own bar. But I guess the way it is helps the game stand out a bit more. This is your ultimate meter. Each character has its own ultimate, and once somebody uses the ultimate, the bar goes down. So you better think twice on whose ultimate you want to use. But I found myself using Graham's ultimate the most in my final team. Yes, I used Mist and Edelweiss for a while, but I felt comfortable with these 4 right here. This bar right here will show you positive and negative effects each individual character has. Yellow is positive while blue is negative. Enemies will also have these effects. And similar to Final Fantasy X or something, this bar will tell you whose turn is next. If you are lazy, hate playing games and just want to watch, you can enable Auto Battle Mode, which is retarded. Might as well just watch a damn Let's Play on YouTube or whatever if the goal is just to let the game play itself. No, I never turned this shit on because fuck that. I buy the game to play it, not to watch it play itself. Here are your abilities. Some are direct attacks, some are support abilities, other are healing spells. In fact, only Butterfly and Ringless can use those, and now you know why I had them in my main team. For me, Graham is a no-brainer because his ultimate attacks everybody. Sure, yeah, I know Edelweiss's ultimate does as well, but still. And Smoker has a very useful skill that shields everybody. And yes, the shield can be stacked. Outside of the usual attack abilities, those are the main support abilities I've used, but your strategy might be vastly different from mine. As you can see here as well is this. Some attacks work well on some enemies while others don't, thus the strong and weak indicators. So this can help you with your strategy here and there. But mind you, these strong and weak indicators are not based on the characters themselves, but rather the weapons they use. This is what I mean. See this? Each character has 2 kinds of weapons he or she can use in battle, and while, for example, Smoker's spear is strong against certain enemies, his gun is stronger against others. Similar goes for Ringless's knives and sniper. Graham uses a sword and something like a spear, Edelweiss uses a shotgun and a machine gun, etc. Meaning the characters essentially having 2 fighting styles adds flavor to the game, and I quite like it. It's sad though that the ultimates are based on the character's main weapon of choice, and it doesn't change depending on the weapon the character is currently using in battle. Smoker will always use a spear for his ultimate, despite him using his guns otherwise. Kind of a shame. But then again, some abilities remain main abilities no matter which weapon you are using, and the character automatically changes weapons only for that move and then changes weapons back. So some moves will change depending on the weapons while others will remain no matter what. A bit of a shame is also that you can't change your weapons on the fly during the battle, outside of what I've explained a few seconds ago if you can remember that far back. I certainly can't. Instead, you have to finish the battle and then change the weapons in the main menu. But still, regarding weapons, yeah, I think some points are kind of a shame, for example not being able to change weapons on the fly, but I get what the developers' intentions were, and yeah, it's kind of fine the way it is. But since I'm showing you this screen, you've noticed various background colors for the weapons, right? These are rarities, and the rarer it is, the stronger it is. Gray is basic, then green, blue, purple, and orange is the rarest variety. Levels also come into play, and you can only get those if you are far enough in the story. Obviously, the higher the level, the stronger it is, but the level and rarities are all fixed. So it's also kind of a shame that you cannot upgrade the weapons yourself, but well, it's more of a nitpick than anything else, and I won't hold it against the game. The layers themselves are a bit monotonous though. They are structured almost the same way, just with new backgrounds. They are not structured the exact same way, but the base structure is. Sure, the colors and backgrounds are interesting to look at the beginning, but after a while I got really sick of it, because the layers are the same thing over and over again. Mostly you can't even escape battles, because the monsters stand in place rotating around, and if you want to move on you necessarily have to fight them. It wasn't a big deal for me, but I can see some people not liking that one bit. Maybe random battles would have been a better choice here. If you love to grind like I do, then Mato Anomalies can be a bit of a pain as well. Reason is that sometimes it will feel like an eternity to level up at all, because you gain so little XP. Sure, the optional layers towards the end will give you quite a bit of XP, but otherwise you get barely enough. Now the later layers are not the only way to gain a decent amount of EXP, because you also have gears. The game doesn't really explain this mechanic too well though. So here you see the gears, they have effects and directions. Let's call these the gear sphere. Yeah, Final Fantasy X. And your job is to use the individual gears to your liking to make your team stronger. How? By looking at the directions each gear has. For example, here, these two gears have the same effect and they can be combined together as long as they are placed in such a way that the direction they are pointing builds a bridge, so to speak. But even that can be a bit annoying to do, because these effects only turn on if you combine enough gears together. The amount of diamonds equal the amount of gears you need to combine to activate these effects. The big diamonds will represent the top effect that's now activated. Honestly, I mostly just kept it at auto equip, because in the beginning I simply lost my patience trying to understand the system, a system the game doesn't explain all too well as stated. But once I took my time to understand it, and it was kind of fun to puzzle around in the gear sphere. Finally, there are talents. This is how you unlock new abilities and enhance some you've already had. They are divided in attack, defense and ultimate. After each level up, you get a single talent point, and some abilities require 3 of those points. So 3 levels without being able to upgrade anything can be a bit of a pain, but oh well. What I really don't like, and I despise it with a passion, is that once you hit level 45, then you don't get any more points, and thus you cannot fully upgrade these talent trees. I mean, the idea behind this is, since you have a limited amount of talent points total, you can try around which abilities and enhancements you want to use, and since you can rearrange those trees at any point in time, you can easily change your strategies. But still, I would have preferred to be able to upgrade the whole trees instead. After all, we had to level up to even get enough points to unlock those trees and enhancements, right? This roadblock after level 45 was really unnecessary, and yes, I despise it. And oh yeah, you can also play cards and enter the infinite domain. The infinite domain is like a, let's call it survival mode, where you play as one character and battle through the layers to gain access to additional stuff. The cards aren't just side quests, though they are relevant for the story. Early on, though, we'll gain the ability to mind hack. Not mind jack, mind hack. And this is his way to do what Graham, Butterfly and the rest essentially do inside the layers. But instead of fighting, he battles with cards as a mind hack. Each character has a special deck. Choose one deck and try to beat the opponent. The opponent's life points have to go down to 0, and while it looks easy, sometimes it can be quite a challenge, but it was quite fun. At first I didn't like it, but later on I grew to appreciate this aspect. You cannot rebuild any deck. The decks are set with their own strengths and weaknesses, and you have to use the cards in that deck to win. I am fine with it now because, yeah, while it's a shame that you cannot rebuild decks, this system forces you to use all decks and find one that can win with, because there is always one that can win, at least if you have some kind of strategy in mind. Essentially, you are forced to win with the limitations you've got, and I actually like that kind of challenge. And this is also where the main character's side stories come into play. Talk to them often enough, and at some point their decks will be enhanced, and that can help you a lot, especially Butterfly's deck. For me though, Mato Anomalies does quite a few things really right. Visually, it looks good. I like the characters, well, outside of Edelweiss. Having a choice between 2 weapons per character is good. The gear system, despite it not being explained all that well, is kind of nice. Soundtracks are top tier. I liked the card system even though there weren't many battles at all. The battle system is actually quite fine, and some other stuff. But again, what is holding this game back from being great is mainly the story. Look, I actually like the idea behind the story, but the developers failed by looking a bit too much at what Persona did. There was no clear direction, and as a result the whole thing comes across as unstructured and somewhat uninspired. The story as a whole might be the main negative here, but then you are constantly reminded of the small things that the game lacks or fails at. Mato Anomalies simply lacks polish, that's the best I can describe it.